All right, we have a caller.
There's something
Come
in the
on.
commandments about bearing false witness.
There is.
That's the part our president never read. Thanks for calling. Thanks for checking into the Atheist Forum. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, my name is Duncan. My question for you: I'm a Christian theist. Since you lack belief in God as the ground of all being, where God would be the foundation and basis for all rationality and intelligibility, since you lack belief in God, what then would be the ground of all being, or that which is absolute, that provides you with a basis for any intelligibility at all?
Well, the ground of all being is a pretty murky sort of concept, I should think, and not one which is clearly evident when you consider our experience of the universe. There is, you would have to get into a considerable theological discussion or a philosophical discussion with someone like Sartre to come up with an adequate means of conveying the sense of what you mean by ground of all being. Especially
do you have such a conception?
No, I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I'm not clear on what, exactly what
so
the ground of all
it can
being
be murky. Yeah,
is that something like a creator, or please explain that term a little bit, Duncan,
well,
please.
the ground of all being is whatever is absolute that provides for all contingencies.
Mm-hmm.
So when you as atheists make certain assertions about contingent relationships, they're going to be contingent ultimately on something that is absolute. That absolute, whatever it is, will either be personal or impersonal. If the absolute is personal, that's what we would call God. But since you lack belief in God, you must believe that there is an impersonal absolute that provides for all.
No, I believe that there's no such thing as absolutes. I believe that change is the only constant. And the one truth is that, and in time, all things, this too shall pass. Okay.
Right. If you don't believe in any absolutes, then why does the word green mean the same thing now than it did last week? Do you believe that there are laws of nature, sir?
I believe in making a fair analogy, of which comparing the color green to the idea of an absolute deity is not a fair comparison. Do you believe there are
laws of nature? Do you believe there are laws of nature?
Yes, I do.
Yes, I think we can all agree that if you want to go to a conception as the ground of all being, then the most obvious ground of all being is the universe itself. But the universe is continuously changing over time.
You're not addressing my question. You're talking around it. Now,
no, well, I'm giving.
Asked you, if you say there are no absolutes, then how do you assert that there are even laws of nature if there are no absolutes? You believe in laws of nature, don't you?
There are regularities and consistencies that are clearly observable.
What secures that there are laws of nature? What secures ultimately that there are laws of nature? Do they exist absolutely in and of themselves?
Oh, that's a good question, but
it is a good question, and it's not necessary for me to know the answer to that question in order to know that the evidence concerning a supreme being is non-existent.
Okay, good.
That I do know.
Okay,
it's a human invention.
I have a question.
I don't pretend to be a astrophysicist or a biological scientist or any of those things of that nature. So whether or not I know the answer to the question has nothing to do with the underlying facts.
Okay, so you say there's no evidence for God. Now, evidence entails causal relations and connections. Do you agree with that? I'm sure you would, right? Evidence entails causal relations and connections. So when you say there's no evidence for God, then the sun, the moon, and the stars don't have a causal relation to God as the causal origin.
That only moves our ignorance back.
Can I finish my question?
Sure,
please?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, since you deny that the sun, the moon, and the stars don't have a causal relation with God, i.e. evidence, can you tell me what is the causal origin of everything that begins then, if it is not God?
No, I can't, and neither can you.
Okay, if you don't know what the causal origin is, can you tell me how did you rule God out, sir?
I just said a moment ago, I looked at the evidence and I found it to be less than adequate to support the proposition.
Right. You're restating the same claim. That's a circular response. If you say there's no evidence, you're stating that nothing has its causal origin in God. And since you don't know what the causal origin is of everything that begins.
And neither does anyone else.
Okay, all right, fine, but you need to focus on my question, please, right? If you don't know what the causal origin is, how did you rule God out? Stating that there's no evidence is just simply restating the same claim.
Well, I think
so
that we
rule God out?
We actually know the origin of God. God originated with human civilization. Before there were humans, there was no God.
You're speculating.
No, it's not speculation. It's pretty clear.
Question
if you
for
look
Duncan.
through the record of.
So that doesn't rule God out.
No, it doesn't. Duncan, you know the answer to your own question, and I will tell you why. There are literally millions of gods. We'll say thousands. You'll agree with me on that?
Right. But
well, how did you rule out? How did you rule out all of them?
Again?
How did you rule out all of them except the one that you believe in?
How did
and when you answer that question, all you have to do is answer it one more time, and you know how I arrived at the same conclusion.
No, sir. That's what you're giving me is an atheist cliche and slogan, which is
that's because it's true.
One more. Can I finish? Can I finish, please?
Have you? You haven't ever finished? Go ahead.
No, I asked a question, and then you guys.
I'm sorry, you asked me a question. I tried to answer it.
Keep going. Keep going.
Right, you did give me a response, and I appreciate that.
Great.
But the response was not germane to my question. Right now, since you asserted that nothing has a causal relation to God as the causal origin, but you don't know what the causal origin is, how did you rule out God? Do you have a defeater for the existence of a creator God?
I just said the same thing. I'll say the same thing. There are thousands of gods. You've ruled all of them out. Why don't you answer the question yourself? How did you manage to rule out those thousands of gods?
It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what I think.
Well, if it doesn't matter what you say, then why should I even listen to
you? Well, first of all, I'll repeat the question again.
Fine.
Your response is to offer an atheist slogan and cliche. Now, the question I asked you, since you have ruled God out as the causal origin of everything that begins, and you do not know what the causal origin is of everything that begins, do you have a defeater for the existence of God? Telling me, appealing to what I think is not an answer to the question.
Now, when you say
do you have, let me finish. I'm almost done.
Question.
Do you have a defeater for the existence of God?
By defeater, what do you mean? Yeah.
Okay, that God does not exist because of X, Y, Z. Do you have a logical defeater for the existence of God?
I never said God does not exist. I have never said that. What I said was that the evidence of the existence of God doesn't exist.
Right. Now,
that's the defeater, okay? And it's the same defeater you use. Why do you keep asking me such an obvious question?
Do you understand that when you say that there's no evidence for God, it is the same thing as saying that nothing has its causal origin as in God? Okay, that's the same thing.
No, it's not.
How did you? Okay, yeah, it is. Let me explain to you why it is. Evidence has to do with causal relations and connections between events.
Duncan,
if you say there's no evidence for God, let me finish, please.
No, I'm not going to let you finish because I'm not going to sit here and listen to a sermon. I'm not here to be lectured.
I'm pointing out your mistake.
No, you're not.
It's not a lecture. I'm simply correcting your mistake, and you don't like it.
Well, if you can do it briefly,
if you say there's no evidence for God, if you say there's no evidence for God, then what you are saying is nothing has a causal relation or connection to God as the causal origin. Now, I asked you, do you know what the causal origin is of everything that begins? And you said, no, you don't. Then how do you know that God is not the causal origin then?
Well, ignorance in this case, like the ignorance of the origin of the universe itself, it does not necessarily mean that you can fill in that space with God. As I was saying before,
that's not answering my question, sir.
Well, maybe not, but however, we're trying to give you an example of what is, after all, a cultural artifact, the notion of God, and how you came by that.
You're not answering my question.
It is anchored in the past. It's anchored in human history and human understanding. All evidences of God, all churches, all religions, all artwork and everything that has to do with it is anchored in time and anchored in human civilization and history. And you would have to admit that, well, I'm not sure that your question could be answered.
If you state that there's no evidence for God, it is the same as saying nothing has its causal origin or causal relation to God. It's the same statement. Now, Since you have ruled God out and you don't know what the causal origin is of everything that begins, how did you rule God out? Do you have a logical defeater for the existence of God?
I think I've tried to answer that several times, but let me ask you this. Why don't you give us the evidence of the causal relationship? If it's so easily discerned, why don't you just prove it to us right now?
I'm still waiting for an answer to my question. You stated there's no evidence for God,
and I've answered it. I've answered it 3 or 4 different times. I'm sorry that you didn't like the answer. Okay.
Yeah, we actually have.
It had nothing to do. It had nothing to do with me not liking it, sir.
We actually have. Duncan,
your response was not germane to my question.
That's true, but Duncan, we've got another caller, and maybe he knows the answer to your question.
It could be.
Let's find out.
But before you go, Duncan, would you like a get out of hell free card? If you would,
let know if you could still answer my question. You said that there's no.
Apparently, I can't. I've tried several times, and you've said I haven't. So
no, you just keep on over talking me. Is what you do.
Well, let's give the other caller.
Thanks, Duncan. Call us again. Bye bye.
Thanks anyway.
You're right. So you can't answer my question, so you dump me as a caller.
Well,
again, try again later.
12 minutes.
Why don't you call us back with the proof? Okay.
No, sir. I'm waiting for an answer. You haven't answered my question. The question is, do you have a logical defeater for God? Because if you don't, you can't stipulate that there's no evidence.
So your argument is, if we can't disprove the God, it exists, and that's not a viable argument, because you've got.
I didn't make an argument to you.
But that's the assertion of your question.
I didn't make an argument to you. I'm simply evaluating your claim that there's no evidence for God, and the only way that you can make that statement is you either have to determine what is the causal origin of everything that begins.
I'm ready to listen to the evidence. I don't have any.
Please.
I'm ready to hear it.
Please.
May I finish?
Okay. Now, when you state, I'd like to finish my point. If you assert that there's no evidence for God, you are asserting that nothing has its causal origin in God.
All right, I've heard that 10 times.
We've been around.
Right now,
let's go ahead.
Now, if you're going to assert that, then you're going to have to either tell me what the causal origin of everything is, or offer a logical defeater for God. But you have done neither, gentlemen.
Okay. Well, let's go on, and we'll see what another call. Here we go. All right. Hello, caller.